Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Cerini, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Erika Floreska, Executive Director of the Long Island Children's Museum. Today's conversation focuses on advocacy, a topic that is incredibly important for nonprofit leaders, yet often feels intimidating or unclear. Erika has been actively engaging in advocacy at both the state and national level, and we're excited to learn from her experience and share practical insights for nonprofit organizations, especially those here on Long Island. Erika, thank you for joining us here today.
Great to be here, Ken.
So to start off, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the role of the Long Island Children's Museum and how advocacy has been utilized by the museum?
Sure. So here at Long Island Children's Museum is the most visited museum on Long Island. We serve nearly 300,000 people a year. Visitors coming to us, birthday parties, school visits, outreach into the communities, special event rentals here at the museum, you name it. We're really focused on the well-being of children and families through the power of play. That's sort of our vision and where we look to intersect with the whole community of Long Island, trying to raise kids, trying to help parents out and be a place where families can come together. That's what we do. And try to work in partnership with our other nonprofit colleagues and neighbors in serving children and families on Long Island.
So how does advocacy kind of connect to your mission over there?
Yeah, so advocacy is really important to our mission because we really want to connect to the elected officials who are representing all the constituents. Our museum does serve nearly every zip code in Nassau and Suffolk County, and quite a bit of Western Queens. And as a resource to the community, as a place where families can come, school visits can come, elected officials we want them to know what's happening here. And then whenever there are policies around childhood education, wellness and learning, and connectedness and support for nonprofits, we want to be at the table so that we can advocate for the things that our sector needs or museums need or education programs need and have a relationship with them already to have those conversations.
So you've recently participated in a lobbying day in Albany, and I know you're headed for DC for a Museums Advocacy Day.
Yep.
What motivated you to kind of step more into that advocacy role?
Well, for me, it really started a previous job when I worked in the city for a community music school, the Bloomingdale School of Music. And that's where I started just inviting elected officials to come see what we were doing. And I was totally surprised because they came and they were interested. I'm like, it's my little community music school on the Upper West Side. But that's where I started to realize elected officials are not as intimidating as I originally thought. They're not scary people. They're actually, most of them are elected because they do want to serve their constituents. And so that I got more involved because when I enjoy meeting people, I feel really passionate about the mission of LICM, about children and families education. You know, we have a phrase, the children who play together today will work and live together tomorrow. And our elected officials are really committed to making our communities better. How do we live? How do we make them affordable for families? And we want to be at the table. So I'm personally interested in it as the president of the museum. I have a role in advocating and being out in the community. So that's how I got started. And actually, my first official advocacy day was with Museums Advocacy Day. So our sector, the museum sector, gathers once a year down in DC, which I'm about to head down for my fourth advocacy day. And so we go and advocate for the sector of museums in general. And in doing that, there are some policy requests we have, and we get assigned meetings with different congressional leaders or Senate leaders. And when we went, I got to go. And not only did I get to talk about the advocacy for the museum field, then they wanted to know, well, what are you doing for my constituents? And I met with all the Long Island representatives, and I could then tell them about LICM and realize that while there's major national policy there that we want to talk about, elected officials also want to see it in action. What does it look like? And running a museum, I can say, here's what it looks like in our place that's serving your constituents.
So when we think about advocacy, I know that a lot of times there are trade associations and things like that that do work and bring nonprofits together.
Mhm.
Um, when you look at advocacy, do you kind of look at more towards, bringing organizations together in a collaborative way for advocacy, or do you think organizations should be looking to do more of that advocacy on their own, or is there some sort of combination that should be taking place here?
Yeah, I'm a both and. I really believe if you're talking about policy, it is always great to connect with others who care about the same issues. So, we have the Long Island Arts Alliance here on Long Island. That's for all of those of us really focused on the arts. As I said, I'm part of museums advocacy, and that's where the children's museums, the American Association of Museums, so all museums, and the Association of Science and Technology Centers, we all come together, and that's more powerful when you have, in this case on a national level, folks from all states, this a bigger breadth. You have more people advocating for the same thing. It's always best at that level to join forces. And in addition, I think particularly for the nonprofit field, getting to know your local person, getting to know your local representatives, inviting them to see your work and your impact on the community for yourself, for your own organization, that matters too, because that makes it personal for these elected officials. They get to see what is happening in my community for my constituents, tell them a story, and that's what will stick with them to then bring to their conversations about policy or granting or opportunities that the state or the national or even the county might want to get involved in. So I think it's a both and. You want to advocate with your sector, with your bringing multiple organizations together, and then really have a local personal approach for your own institution.
When you look at advocacy, who should get involved? Is it the employees? Is it the board of directors? Is it volunteers? Is it the people you serve? And I'm sure this is going to be another end or free.
All and all. I do think, listen, as leaders of nonprofits, we all have a role in building those relationships. I think you think about who's on your team. A lot of us are, I mean, I'm a larger nonprofit on Long Island and recognize I have a larger staff. Folks who have smaller staffs, who on your team's good at talking to people and telling the story of your mission? Because that's what's going to connect with they don't read anything. I mean, no, they do read, but they're really focused on, if you give them a good photo. I mean, one of the best advocacy tools that I've learned opens the conversation is a heat map. So it's a map where we take all of Long Island and we've mapped out the zip codes of our visitors. And it's like a brighter red the more people come from that zip code. And heat maps that show where your people are coming from are what elected officials immediately go to. Where's my district? How are you serving them? Who's there? And it says, oh, you're serving my people. Tell me more. So a heat map and then some good photos, but it's really the messenger. Because often in these meetings and when you're meeting with elected officials, sometimes you're just meeting with their staff, and that is not a bad thing. It's actually okay to meet with their staff who's in charge of the legislation or their calendar. That is as good as meeting with elected officials. But basically, it's important to have the messenger be someone who's an effective communicator of your mission. So whether it's the senior leader, the president, the executive director, whether it's a board member who's the board chair, or just a board member who is great at talking to people and telling your story. I absolutely think when you can bring one of the people benefiting from your nonprofit with you, they are going to tell the story better than anyone. And in our case, having children or family talk to and say what they love about the museum or what they've gotten from visits to the museum or one of our programs, our access programs, that is absolutely the most powerful. But depending on your capacity and time, getting all those pieces together can be difficult. But that's also where you think where can I go to see the elected officials, go to their office, go up to Albany? You can go to them. But the absolute best thing is, of course, we all know this, when you can invite and have the elected officials come and see your nonprofit in action. And if you can get them on your site, that's when you have a student or a constituent, a person being served there to meet with them and really see the whole picture. Then they really see the impact.
How have you opened the door to develop that relationship with the elected officials?
Well, here I was reflecting on this because really it is, I want everyone to know it's not scary when you think, how do you start? Who is the elected official that's representing me? Send an email to that person in the office, do a little research, pick one person. This is how I would say, pick one person, that's directly, whether it's a county legislator, whether it's a town representative, whether it's your state assemblyman or senator, do a little research. Go on their website. They have like, what are the caucuses? What are the different committees that they're on? That gives you a sense of what their priority is and where they're definitely focused. And see if you can find a connection between your mission and any of those committees or interests. I think one of our representatives is on a STEM initiatives committee. And I'm like, oh, LICM does some STEM learning. I'm going to focus an invite towards that. But really, it starts with an email to the staff, to the local office, pick up the phone and call. They actually want to hear from constituents, and then invite them to an event, invite them to see a program, and don't be discouraged if they don't come right away. This is where you've got to sort of build in a little bit of repetition, every week, once a month, send an email. Here's what's happening. We'd love to have you come for a visit. Get to know the staffer who does scheduling at the local office. Maybe a staff member comes first and meets with you. It is a building of a relationship. So each step takes some time. But then when they do come, because they will, it may take a few months because their schedule, they're busy. I mean, they're out and about in the community. But I've never talked to someone who's like, no, I'm not coming to visit, because they really do. It's a matter of finding the right time. And then when they come, have the people, Ken, like you just said, who should it be? Should it be a board member? Should it be a constituent? Should it be a staff member? Have those people ready to go and meet the elected official. And whether it's a 20-minute visit and it's a few talking points, or whether they'll sit down and actually stay for an hour and watch a class take place, or see families in an exhibit, or come to a theater show that we offer. Really be accommodating to their schedule, because they've got, they're trying to meet so many people. But it really can start that small. Like, you don't have to have a big lobbyist. You don't have to have all the resources in place. You just have to want to build a relationship and then be consistent in sending messages and inviting them to something you're doing.
I think a lot of nonprofit organizations kind of wait until there's an issue that needs to be resolved before kind of stepping out and starting to develop these relationships. You want to talk a little bit about why it's so important to kind of develop the relationship up front and have the governmental official understand who you are?
Well, I think you laid out that question perfectly. I think really building a relationship about just what you're doing and what your mission is about. It's great for your elected officials to know what they want to know, what's happening in their community and what's available to their constituents, so that if someone comes to them with an issue and, it's children and families, like, I want to get out, here's something they think, oh, LICM, let me send them to the museum. Or let me call someone at the museum and see if there's a program that fits this need. So they have you on top of mind for your mission and how you're serving the community. So that then if you do have a problem, or an emergency happens, something that, that affects your community, something like that, you call, there's a relationship already. And they're not just feeling like they're going to be called to fix a problem, which honestly, that's what they get a lot of calls. I mean, that's what they're there for, to help us solve problems. But if you've built that relationship ahead of time, when the call comes, it helps you out. And here's an example. This is when I worked in the city, but we've been building relationships with our local reps, and our phone system went out and the phones got cut off. And I was like, we need help. This isn't being repaired. They called Verizon, got someone to prioritize our location because they knew this was a problem in the area. And then they called me later and said, oh, we might have a grant. You guys are a nonprofit, because I had been in touch with them, but I built the relationship before the problem. They helped solve the problem. And then top of mind, when an opportunity came for a capital grant, they thought of us and called us. So that's another instance of building a relationship. And it's the same thing out here on Long Island. I've been here long enough, so we've had some folks turn over, right? One of the challenges is elected officials. Sometimes they're in office for a long time. Sometimes new folks come. And you just have to prioritize building the relationship with whoever's new, and finding out what their interests are, how easy are they to get a hold of, who on their staff is going to make the difference. So it does take time, it does take effort, but the payoff of having elected officials know, particularly for nonprofits, know what you do, because each of us does something really special and unique. I mean, one of the things about Long Island are all of these nonprofits, that you just, I mean, it kind of fills your heart. One, with like amazing people doing amazing work, and what a powerful resource we are as nonprofits to our whole community, making sure elected officials are thinking about us and knowing about us and have us in mind as they're working to build a better Long Island. It really benefits all of us.
So, how do you find that balance in terms of how often you reach out to elected officials, how often that communication takes place, and what form do you typically take with respect to communication? Is it typically a phone call, an email, a letter? If you want to talk about any of those items.
Sure. I think, it's important to understand what you have the capacity for, right? And each nonprofit is staffed so differently, and how often, what's the cycle of your own institution? Because if there's a big event that you work towards every year, you may want to just build up and focus on who can we get to that one event, but you got to build up ahead of time. If you're an organization that's got programs going every week, you might say, let me think, maybe once a month. If you've got enough new content, you might reach out. If you any special event, that's where they love to come. The other thing is, if you invite them to an event, if there's a way for them to speak and have a minute on the microphone in front of their constituents saying, I support this institution, they'll come and say, I support the Long Island Children's Museum. They love that. That can be a way to say, look, we're expecting to have 250 people from your community. If you'd like, in my introductions, you can say hello. If that works for whatever that situation is, they do love that. That makes a difference. You always want to recognize them, even if they're not speaking. You want to invite them. You want to let people know they're in the room. But the invitation, what you asked, I mean, email is always a good start. Email all the information, follow up with a call. If you're doing any kind of formal invite or formal request for funding, we do a hand copy letter still and an email that sort of has it as an attachment. You never know what's going to get through the mail, so I don't always rely on that. And definitely focus on the local offices first. Get to know who's in the local office. For the state, sometimes the electeds are up in Albany, sometimes they're here. You don't always know their schedule. It's hard to know their schedule. They don't know their schedule. But that's where if you build that relationship with the local person, they can start to tell you and say, oh, this event is here. That event might be a good one here. Why don't you come to the office, and we have office hours. Maybe you want to do an introduction there. So it can be any one of those things. Social media, you can always, I mean, that's a good way to shout them out and say thank you for coming. But that's not as effective in actually scheduling anything.
Right. So you talked about, having that heat map, right? And showing where your population benefits their constituency. What
Yep.
about though, if you're trying to connect with someone who's on a committee or head of a committee and that's who you want to, but they're not in your constituency? How do you approach something like that?
Yeah, I would say one, start with your representative who knows who's head of that committee. Because they can be another thing that electeds are great at is connecting you. So if they know, you want to tell them all the great things you're doing, but then if you tell them I'm having a challenge, I'm having a problem, who might help me? They know a lot of people and they love connecting people. And in this case, I think it's effective. You start with the local person and say, hey, I'm interested in talking with this person who's the head of the committee on, health and wellness or aging or whatever, housing, whatever your topic may be. But then you can also go directly to that person's office and say, hey, I'm a constituent in, District 22 or whatever the district is, and I'm interested in this issue. I know you're the chair of that caucus. Could you have a 20-minute meeting? And I mean, set your expectations, ask for 15 to 20 minutes. It's hard for anyone to say no to that, because they want to know. This is like the biggest fear that I had is, oh, I don't want to talk to, they wouldn't even want to talk to me. They're so busy. They have other things. We're not that important. This sort of sense of elected officials are, on top. No, they are like the nicest people. And they really do, most of them really do want to actually hear and talk to their constituents. So, put that fear aside. They really do. And then find your ways to connect in. I mean, a both and.
Yeah, part of the problem is I think they just don't fully understand what a lot of the organizations are doing and how the nonprofit sector works and stuff like that.
Yep.
They're more in tune with business, they're less in tune with nonprofit. So the more you can kind of get the messaging across and show the impact that nonprofit is having on the environment, the economy, and everything else, I think that helps.
Well, Ken, that's a really good point. So one of the things I learned from the National Museum's Advocacy Day is how do we help nonprofits talk about our economic impact? Because you're totally right. Some elected officials, that's what they know, that's what makes sense. They're trying to, boost the economy. And sometimes nonprofit, we don't like to think like that. We're in the making people better, we're in making communities better. We don't want to put an economic number on it. However, for us, there was a whole how do you write an economic impact statement? And it's a one pager that literally says, here's what our budget is. Here's the number of people we employ. Here are the number of people we serve. Here's the tourism that we bring in. Here's the added effect. There are some studies that can help you. In our case, in the arts, actually, Long Island Arts Alliance did a survey
Yep.
of the sort of added impact of every visitor who comes here does spend money on gas, does spend money on food in the area, does sort of have a ripple effect into the economy. And when you can put things in economic terms, even if it's like 3 bullet points, we're a $6.4 million organization. I hire 40 full-time people and 100 part-time people. We're a workforce development, machine. We've got a lot of people here that can trigger in their brain, oh, you're a business, you hire people, you pay people, they pay taxes. That's all part of the system. And we shouldn't, I mean, we nonprofits don't pay taxes, right? But I pay taxes, my staff pay taxes. We hire vendors to work in our building. We pay them, they pay taxes. So if we can, as nonprofit leaders, embrace the economic impacts we make along with the mission impacts, that is a key way to talk the elected officials talk. That's such a good point, Ken, you bring up. And I hadn't thought about it till my museum's advocacy day said, here, write an economic impact statement. And I'd be happy to share ours, if anyone's interested in
Yeah,
seeing
that'd be
that.
great if you want to send it over and we'll try to push it out. I mean,
Yeah, I can I'll have a heat map and our economic impact statement.
one of the things that we see all the time is that, organizations do a very good job of, as you said before, talking about and telling their story. But then they don't always do a good job of telling their impact. And I think when you're talking to politicians, you got to bring the two of them together and they got to, be able to see and feel and have that emotional connection. But then they also have to understand that, the economic and the impact it's having on lives. So again, I think it's a combination of two that has to come together.
Well, and really helping understand. I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges. I don't think any of us have totally nailed it all the time, but how do we connect what we're doing and what it takes to do what we do? I think nonprofits, I think every one of us has such an incredible backstory, like the team behind me and the staff and the caring and the creativity that goes into providing this service is not always understood. Right. And that's where if you have a staff member who's worked for you for 20 years and here's what they've seen in that, can tell an interesting story along with someone who's benefited from your services. It is how do we, tell that story and let them understand, we may be nonprofit, but the people we serve are not nonprofit. And how we don't want to live at the margins of just balancing our budgets. We actually want to have enough surplus so we can pay people well, so we can invest in our mission, so we can do more. I always say, like, one of the things, like, oh, we don't ever make money. And it's like, no, if we can, I mean, it's hard to, right, these days. If we can have a surplus, the difference is that surplus doesn't go to the shareholders. That
Yep.
surplus goes back into our mission. And so that having that extra resource, having those things help us serve our community better. And talking about nonprofits as a business, definitely elected officials speak that language first, many of them.
You mentioned earlier, you mentioned lobbyists.
Mhm.
Um, so I assume you both do advocacy on your own and with lobbyists.
Yep.
What's the difference? How do you use a lobbyist effectively?
Two big differences. One, you've got to have a budget to pay lobbyists, and they save you a lot of time. really. I mean, I started all my lobbying when I was in the city, and when I started here at LICM was just me and staff members finding out, you have to figure out who are your elected officials, who are their staff members, what are they interested in. You have to do a lot of that research yourself. Um, and then, but if you have lobbyists, they know all those people. They know when there's turnover. They can help connect you. They can, they're around the staffers of the elected officials more often, so they might remind, if they have LICM on their mind, they may say, "Oh, remember, there's this big event coming up. Maybe if you're in the district, you want to stop by." They can just help facilitate awareness sort of all year long. And then if you have a big ask, a big project, like we recently opened Saltwater Stories, our new exhibit about the maritime culture of Long Island. That was really, we raised $1 million for that exhibit, federal, state, county, all of it. And that's where just when you're asking for big grants like that, having lobbyists that help spread the word. But you don't have to have a lobbyist. That's why I say they're really, it's about helping you know the inner workings, but you still have to build a relationship. They're not there. They are representing you, but they're not taking your place. They're just helping facilitate getting meetings, in Albany. When they call and set up a lobbying day, they know all the people, they know everything inside it. It's much easier. But if I couldn't afford the lobbyists, we can't, and I could dedicate part of my staff time, part of my time in making those requests, you can do that. We can do that without, you don't have to have a lobbyist. It's really what's your resource? Where can you spend your time? But I don't want anyone to think you can't connect to your elected officials unless you have a lobbyist. You really can. They really do want to know what's going on.
Did you ever do an inventory of the political connections that exist within your organization from a volunteer board, staff level to kind of get an understanding of who has contacts that could help the organization?
Sure. I mean, I think this is one of the, we always like to know, who do you know, right? Who can you help us introduce us to? And because we have quite a bit of work that we do with the county, with the state, and with the federal agencies, we always want to know who knows who. I think it's also very clear, we're nonpartisan. We are not, we work with everyone, Republican and Democrat, and we really always want to make that clear and make, what we're advocating for are children's issues and family issues, and education, early childhood education, arts and culture. And that's not those aren't partisan issues. We believe everyone should have access to the services we offer. So what we look for if you have connections, whether it's a politician, whether it's a staff member, it's to help make the introductions. I mean, of course, that always helps. We all know, like people will talk to people who know people more quickly than they'll just answer a blind call. But I do want to say, if you're calling an elected official who represents you, they will answer the phone. They will respond. Like, they have a sort of an obligation as an elected official, where if you're cold calling a corporation or a foundation or a new partner, that's, cold calls are really hard there. I think they're actually easier with elected officials.
So let's switch gears a second. What was one of the most impactful moments or lessons you had from either recent or past advocacy that you've done?
Um, I mean, a fun one, when I was just up in Albany, we had 15 different meetings scheduled, and walking in front of a room of someone from Westchester who wasn't on my schedule. I said, "Oh, Westchester," popped in, and the elected official and staff member happened to be there. I was like, "Oh, do you like kids and families?" And he was like, "Sure." And he invited me in, and I was able to tell him about our Inside. Right now at LICM, we have an Inside Out exhibit, or the exhibit's called Emotions at Play, based on the movie Inside Out. And he was like, "My
Right.
daughter loves Inside Out." And it seems like just such a simple conversation, but it led to, "Oh, you should come for a visit. Westchester has a children's museum. So does LICM. You can visit around on a break week or a weekend day. It's worth a visit." That was just kind of a little delightful, you know, totally unexpected, but kind of reinforces, if you're there, you pay attention, you never know who might be on the other side of the door.
Great. We're running low on time. So if you could leave nonprofit leaders with one piece of advice on how to advocate without fear in today's environment, what would it be?
One, I would say, pick a person and just start. Just try. Just send an email, reach out. Really, elected officials want to help. And if you try to start like, oh, I've got to have a whole platform or I've got to have a whole thing, like, no, you have a platform and that is your nonprofit. You have the great mission and the work that you do. And wanting elected officials to know about that and picking up the phone, sending that email, do that without fear and then follow up. I think that's the hardest thing is, oh, if you don't hear back right away or they don't come to the first thing you invited them to, don't take it personally. Don't let that stop you. Just maybe find another way. Is there a committee they're on? Is there a particular interest that you can make link to what you're doing? Just start with one or two people and then build from there. But I would say definitely try to put the fear aside because the elected officials do want to know what's happening. They do want to get to know you.
Great, great. So Erika, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experiences and insights on advocacy. This has been incredibly valuable conversation for nonprofit leaders looking to better understand how they can confidentially and effectively advocate for their missions. And thank you everyone for tuning in to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with fellow nonprofit leaders. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ken.